Studio this evening, we have Dr. Jade Gibson, Doctor of Anthropology at UCT. Jade, good evening and welcome to The Honest Truth.
Hello.
Also joined in studio, Sharika Collins. Sharika, good evening.
Good evening.
Let me turn you on. Sharika, good evening.
Good evening.
As well as Peter Duplessis. Peter, good evening and welcome to The Honest Truth.
Thank you.
All right, it's all about this book that you've written, Jade, called Glowfly Dance. I have to ask you, what motivated you to write Glowfly Dance?
Okay, Benito. Well, Glowfly Dance is actually a true story. It's based on my childhood. And one of the main reasons was that you hear in these stories in the news, you just hear this story that someone got killed by their partner, could be a boyfriend, husband. And you go, oh, how awful, how terrible. You say, oh, we want to end domestic violence. We want it all to stop. How terrible, how awful. But I think we don't really engage with the real issues behind what leads to these events and this sort of big story and the big issues, and unpack a lot of the situations that happen. So we don't hear the story behind the stories. And if we don't hear the story behind the stories, we don't actually find out how we can really make a difference. You know, we actually need to unpack and unpick everything. So Glowfly Dance is that story, but it's from a child's perspective.
I see.
About a child who loses her mother. It's set between the age of 3 and 14. And interestingly, it seems to appeal to all ages, men as well as women, because men were children once as well. And interestingly, which I hadn't expected, to appeal to young adults as well, because they relate to the child's story. So I wrote it to create awareness and then effectively perhaps to change lives and get people talking. So it really helps people to talk across generations if they read the book, or people to talk between themselves, and also possibly maybe one day save some lives, which couldn't happen in my case. Yeah.
You mentioned that in order to deal with societal challenges like violence, for example, it's important and more effective, particularly if one needs to address it, that you need to know the backstory. You provided a bit of a backstory with the book that you've written, Glowfly Dance, but ordinarily within a community setting, how realistic can one know the backstory of each particular individual or family to enact some sort of redress with the violence they experience?
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, but actually the backstory in this story is not the story of the individual so much, and we tend to focus a lot on the victim. We don't focus on why is the perpetrator getting away with what they get away with, and actually pointing fingers at the person doing it, which is really where we should be looking, I think. And so this book looks at, from a child's perspective, what's going on, a mother who's really trying to get out of a violent relationship where society is letting her down, where the law courts are letting her down, where friends don't understand, and that lack of understanding is where we fail to help people in these situations, where police don't help, where institutions don't help. I mean, they try, but they don't always know how. And I think unless we really sit down and talk about what are the small things we can start to do, first of all, to change opinions, like the person who's going through it is not necessarily a weak person. It's very, very hard to get out of a violent relationship or any sort of abusive relationship. And often those people can be very strong people just struggling against the odds. And some of those odds are what society is not doing. And there are many strong people who've got through and have survived and gone on, like myself, to do relatively well in society. But I don't think that we are putting the responsibility on society to change its views and values and to start asking the right questions. Instead, we keep pointing our fingers at the people who are in really difficult situations. So I always say, if someone attacks someone in the street, do we then take that person being attacked and the attacker and put them in a room together for a year and say, sort it out between yourselves? Because that, to me, is not how you... So, but that's what we do in a domestic violence situation, and we need to shift those views.
How do we shift those views?
We really start to look at where we are failing to actually engage with these issues properly. There's a lot of silences, and we need to start asking questions. So I don't have all the right answers because that's not my job. Mine is just to raise the questions, to stimulate debate, to get people talking about what happened, those different points along the way where people could intervene. And you see in Glowfly Dance in the story that there's many, many points at which people could have intervened and done something differently had they been more aware of the situation. Because often these are very close situations. People are not really seeing inside because they don't, and they won't get a glimpse because often the person in this situation might be scared or covering up themselves. There's a sense of shame. And the other thing is to get rid of that sense of shame, that we shame people going through it as if they're victims. Children who witness this somehow stay silent in schools. And that was my experience as well, because nobody tells you to be quiet, but somehow there's a sort of implicit understanding that you cannot or should not speak about these things.
The society's norms.
Yeah, society's norms. And we need to make it okay that anyone going through it, there's nothing wrong with them. There's no shame for anyone who's experiencing this, because this can happen to anyone. The shame is in the person doing it, and we need to address that situation.
Did you expect the book to touch so many lives and to have the reaction that it has had?
I never expected men to respond. I mean, some people really fighting for the book, to get it out there, have been men, and I've been completely amazed. I had to speak at a men's indaba of ex-offenders once, which was really, difficult, and I had to then go back to that child position. I never expected young adults to relate to it, because, this is set in a different time, and it was a sort of cell phone-less time. And yet young adults, I've got one with me today and another slightly older adult, but still young, who've really connected with that story of being the child. And I think the difference is to look at it from a very innocent perspective. But of course, when you hear these stories about women being injured or killed, I will always ask myself, what about these children left behind? I mean, 3 women a day are killed in South Africa on average. It's not a small number, over 1,000 a year. I think unnecessarily. I think if we changed our views, it would be different. And the number of children left behind are thousands. So Glowfly Dance tells a story. It's not a really gross and horrible story. It's really looking at strengths and survival. It's got humor and laughter as well, but it tells a story that I think through reading it, and hopefully people of all ages can then sit down and discuss the points at which, for example, they could ask, when was that choice made? Should she have stepped out now? If we gave awareness to young people of what a violent relationship can lead to, because people tend to be very optimistic, but if there's violence going on, we actually need to be able to see it. And so one thing you can do is to get people to see much earlier what's going to happen along the road. And actually, when you read a story like this, then you start to realize, okay, maybe if this is happening in my life, I need to look at this very, very closely. And other people as well, not just to dismiss it.
Sure. 5 minutes before 9, this is The Honest Truth on Smile 90.4 FM. We're in conversation with Dr. Jade Gibson, author of the book Glowfly Dance. Joined in studio as well by Sharika Collins. Now, Sharika, as Jade described you as being a young person.
Adult, yeah.
a young adult.
Yeah.
Have you read Glowfly Dance?
Yes, I have actually. I got it for my birthday.
Yeah?
Yeah, and I didn't actually want to read it at first.
Why not?
Because I wasn't really interested in reading the book, but it kept watching me, and I was like, let me rather read this book. Maybe I can learn something from it.
All right.
And
Who got it for you for your birthday?
Well, my mother actually.
Fantastic.
Yeah, she got it for my birthday, and so then I was like, okay, let me read it, and then I read it.
And how did the story impact upon you?
Well, there was lots of emotion actually, and it was very relatable for me, because as a young kid, I saw my family members being abused, and at the time I didn't have a voice, but I knew what I wanted to do when I get older, to raise awareness and stand up for those that are going through this. And so I was like, when I read this book, it made me remember, like, oh wait, didn't I want to do that when I was younger? And then so when I read it, I was like, got in touch with Jade, and I said, this is what I wanted to do all the time.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah.
And do you see a lot of what was discussed in the book in your personal life? Are you at school still? Are you studying?
I'm at school still, high school, grade 11.
Grade 11, so
Yeah.
almost there.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of what was the topics that was discussed in the book resonate, or do you see examples of it in the classroom, at school, in the community?
I see it in my community, yes. Not really in the classroom, but I'm
Okay.
sure there's children that are going through it, like at my school and whatever, but they are not like showing it because I feel like they feel ashamed, like they don't want to speak out, and I just want them to feel comfortable to actually speak out. So that's why I'm trying to
Raise awareness.
raise awareness. Yeah.
And how were you going about doing that?
Well, I spoke to Jade yesterday after being on Hectic 99. So I was like, maybe I should go to like schools and actually speak up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd
Okay.
like
So
to do that.
so that is the plan.
Yes.
What is your favorite part of the book, or the one part that really affected you emotionally and thought and made you think, this is exactly what I need to do?
Well, it was actually because of Jade, the girl, May. Yeah, she was 14 years old, and I was like, how can you be so strong being at such a young age and seeing your mother like dead? Like, and then I thought to myself of all the younger children that are much younger than 14 years old, their parents, their mothers being killed and them being left alone. Yet she's so strong, and to just be strong for her and her, younger siblings.
Yeah.
I was like, no, we need to stop this.
Do you think strength is an important characteristic to have in the face of violence, for example?
It is, but I do believe not everyone can have strength.
And how do you provide somebody with strength, do you think? Or not, maybe strength is not the right word, but encouragement, and a safe space to be able to share what they've
Firstly,
experienced.
they need to believe in themselves and feel very comfortable to know that it's okay. So, yeah, I think so.
All right. Peter, you a honors student.
Yes, I actually finished up my honors degree last week.
Fantastic. Congratulations. In what discipline?
In social anthropology.
Social anthropology. So what we're talking about is absolutely what you've been studying about it. And how did this particular book affect you?
I think in the biggest way it affected me more about what came out of it for me, not necessarily the story. It was about the memories that it brought back in my own life and my own experiences, and also things that I've witnessed. And so it opened up a whole new way of getting in touch with past experiences that I shut down for many years in my life.
Yes.
For several years. And so for me, it's not necessarily the storyline, which is beautiful and tragic at the same time, but it's more about the memories that it brought back, and it really brought something, memories back that I had to connect with.
And how did you react and connect to those memories? Was there any resolution from there?
At first, I shut down completely after I actually met Jade at a graduate seminar that we had at the university, and she came to present the book, and we talked a little bit about it. But I started reading, and I started shutting down a little bit. I didn't know what to do, because I had all of these almost flashes of things coming back to me of what happened to me when I was a child and what I witnessed. And I think in a big way it connected me and my mother again, because for many years I didn't understand a lot of the things that my mother went through, having faced a lot of domestic violence, and it brought back that, and it recreated a relationship between me and my mother. So I'm not sure if that...
Yeah, it does make sense. Was the relationship estranged, or was it very difficult prior to you reconnecting and reaching out?
I think there was always something in the air. There was always something, a part of a disconnect. I think when you grow up as a teenager, you kind of disconnect a little bit with your parents, because now you want to be on your own and do all those things. And I think I've always been kind of someone who's very resilient. I've had to learn how to, power up, and I have to depend on myself and, build my own future. And I think I kind of like left that kind of like an empty space between my mom and I. Just kind of like the book gave me perspective of what my mom actually went through. And for many years I didn't have that perspective.
Did you blame her?
I did. When I was in the middle of the book, and I called my mum and I said, listen, I've been blaming you for many years, and I think I was wrong.
How have your other siblings reacted to you reconnecting with your mother?
Pretty well. We actually saw each other a weekend or two ago. And so the conversation between us is going a little bit slow because I think everyone's at different paces in their lives. So hopefully it can be a Christmas present because I think they really need to engage with the book first. It's brought up conversation, and we're all kind of surprised. We all looked at each other when I brought up some stories.
Yes.
And we looked at each other and we're like, what, we went through that? That actually happened? Like, where did you hide that? Because, when you go through trauma, you put it away. Well, some people in my case and in all my siblings' case, we put it away and you just put it there and you move on with life. But actually, it's something you carry with you. And I think the thing that I carried with me was this blame that I put on my mom and the strain that it took on me emotionally. I always say that when you're in conversation with someone, you need to be in your fullness. And I felt like for many years, I was never in my fullness with my mother.
Yeah. And did that affect your own personal development as well? Did you find that it held you back in certain instances? Just in terms of emotional development?
Yeah, I think definitely. I was going to say emotional development. I think in many ways, I relied on myself for many things because that's just what I thought I had to do. But I think for emotional development, and I think this, after reconnecting with my mother, a lot of things, it's not to say that like, oh, my life's changed now and I'm, walking on sunshine.
Sure.
But it's really just opened up my eyes and given me different perspective to grow in a different way. Yeah.
And I think importantly as well, and you mentioned that, Peter, is to, in the reconnecting, is to have that conversation. Jade, we may not have all the answers yet to resolve this particular problem within our society, but if the book, for example, inspires young Sharika that this is her life's particular journey to raise awareness, and at the same time it reconnects Peter with his mother, did you think that you would have this sort of impact, and that the book would have that the book would be this kind of vehicle?
Well, as I said, I really thought it would be elderly ladies reading it to their book clubs. But part of me always thought I really want people to study and discuss this, on another level. But what's been great for me too is that when you grow up with these experiences, it's very, very isolating. That Peter was saying that to me. I was so happy when, and I shouldn't be happy that for what happened, but I was happy to meet someone who understood. And I gave him a big hug, remember, after the class, because I really felt that and we actually laugh about some of the things because in a way, once you open up and you speak about these things, they become lesser and you don't normalize and such, but you realize it's not your fault and there's no shame on you. And so suddenly you're able to say, okay, what are the problems we need to really look at here? At least for me, it helps sort of take away. It helps me feel this. I'm just amazed they came along, actually. I feel really, really, really proud of them. And I know this is a very big thing, actually. And I'm really grateful. I also want at the end of the book, there's a little extra thing that says, I really hope that if some woman is able to read this and walk away from a bad relationship, then this book has done his job. And, it couldn't save my mother's life. I really hope that it's going to go on to at least encourage some people, that perhaps it can help save some lives along the way. And I really mean that, because if we can start looking at where things go wrong, there's situations in this book where officials could have done something. There's friends who really messed up situations by doing and saying the wrong things and actually put my mother's life in danger. This was someone who's trying to get out of a relationship. And I think when you start to see the strength, when you see how hard, for example, we lived in a refuge at one point, safe house, I think you call it here.
Yes.
If you see that a family has to go and change its names, go into hiding, give up its entire life, and the mother has to give up everything to go live in one room in a shared home somewhere, hiding away, scared that husbands are going to turn up, whereas the whole part of that book deals with a refuge. It's not an easy thing to do, and we've got to look at the fact that many women are killed. I think they say 70% of women are killed when they're in the process of leaving or having shortly left their partners, and 50% don't believe it's going to happen. So
how did you, Jade, how did you manage writing that book, Peter spoke about so many memories came flooding back into him, which he had thought he had forgotten about. How did you deal with all of those emotions, revisiting some of those episodes when writing Glowfly Dance?
Well, I think in a funny way I said I'm always going to write this story, because the book was called Glowfly Dance because it's sort of about the idea of fireflies or glowflies flying through the air, and you follow the light like writing, and then it disappears and it's gone forever. So I wanted to write this story down because I felt this is a life gone and snuffed out. And I hear in the news every day, I hear people who I've known quite a few people who either know people or I've met people briefly, and I've heard later they were killed. It's happening all around us. So I wanted, that's what I wanted to do. But then in the writing of it, I literally wrote it as I remembered it. And it is written under different names and places because I still have to have a bit of self-protection.
Sure.
And also, when I wrote it, it was just describing everything. I'm also a writer, so I wanted to write something people could engage with. I didn't want just like a misery story. I wanted to show the strength of a child going through this, which is so you don't feel, it is a horrible story, but you're looking at the survivor, the one who gets through. So it's actually got a positive end. I think you found that, Sharika, didn't you? You said.
Survival.
Sharika, I mean, as an example of somebody who was certainly touched and affected by this book, somebody who hasn't read it, what would you say to encourage them to read it?
Well, first of all, I encourage all teenagers actually to read this book, because you never know what you can actually learn from it. And yeah, for those that are going through it, it makes you feel like you're not alone. And you now know that you're comfortable, and you know that there's someone that also went through that. And you can save someone's life by standing up and speaking up and saying, this is happening to me, or this is happening to my friend, whatever. It's also about society actually, because if you see your friend or someone with a blue eye or, bruise on their mark, you should stand up and say, look here, go to the police or something. Not only the victim to feel so pressurized, because they're obviously scared, So I think society needs to change, and people need to help also. So
Peter,
yes.
why would you recommend the book?
Well, I mean, I always say that, we always use all these terms like social change and all these things. And I think sometimes we imagine it to be so big, but it happens in the smallest of ways, in the everyday. And I think like that moment when I met with Jade and I interacted with this book, that's a small little daily interaction. And that's how change happens. It's with the smallest of ways. And I think that if people can use this book by interacting with it, even if you don't want to read it, tell people about it. Not everyone likes reading necessarily. Is to tell people about it, give the storyline, but also start talking about these particular things in the everyday, when you're sitting in a salon, when you're having coffee, or when you're on a radio station.
Yes.
It's the everyday, and that's how change happens. It's not going to fall out of the sky or anything like that. So yeah, I think it's just by simply interacting with it, or when you're a listener on the show tonight, is to go and where you go to bed and tweet about it, or you put it on your Facebook, or you talk at school about it tomorrow morning, or at church on Sunday, or whatever the case may be. It's about just having the conversation going on and on and on.
And you asked what it was like. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And when I actually wrote it, I thought, what have I done? It was like leaping off a cliff without a parachute. But it was scary, but it's actually liberated me from that story as well, myself.
Yes. Brilliant. Where can we get a copy of the book? Where is it published and distributed?
Through bookshops across South Africa.
Great.
For those that are unfortunate, you could actually go get it at the library.
Yeah, the library.
Yeah, the library.
And through online distributors as well.
Yeah.
Great stuff. You make a good point, Sharika.
Yeah.
Sharika, I mean, we have to make use of the services that are available, and the library system is certainly one way to do it. Peter du Plessis, Sharika Collins, and author of Glowfly Dance, Dr. Jade Gibson. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Benito.
Smile Breakfast for Children's Beds.